you. It's always a treat to see you, Sherelle, and begin with your voice and your presentation. It's a great privilege for me to have this opportunity to engage with Rabbi Rick Jacobs. And I'm bringing you here to the foreground so I can see you, Rabbi Jacobs. Thank you again. You are one busy rabbi, and that you made time for us, not only in Orange County, but across the country. So since we're beginning in Orange County, I'm sitting in Tustin. What's one image that comes to mind about Orange County and how it shaped you?
Thank you, Rabbi Spitz. And it's great to see a lot of you. Actually, a few of you I actually know from other contexts. And I was just thrilled by this invitation. I mean, to be honest, I haven't lived in Tustin since I was in high school. And really the chance to not only come back and have this conversation, but reflect on what was a very formative time for me. If I could just say, for me, the thing that stands out is that when my family moved to Orange County from New York, when I was 10 years old, it wasn't a very Jewish place. I'll be very candid. And my high school, I went to Foothill High School for those who are in the neighborhood of Tustin. And we weren't very many Jews at Foothill High School. And I remember, Yom Kippur having an unexcused absence from school and kind of growing up in the late 60s, early 70s with a sense of being different and also wanting to very much kind of stand tall as a liberal, which again was a thing that I'll give you one image, which to me was the emblematic experience of my childhood. People would come to visit our family during the end of December for like a meal or lighting the candles. So they say, "Well, what's the number on Shady Ridge Drive where you live?" I said, "We don't need to know." No, if we're coming to your house, we need to know what your address is. I said, "No, you don't need to know." Well, how are we going to find you? I said, "You go onto Shady Ridge Drive, just go to the one house without Christmas lights." And there we are. And that was true for my childhood. And you say, well, that's true in a lot of America, let's be honest. It's not true so much in New York and some other places. So I think that growing up in Tustin, Orange County, was very shaping and in some ways put a little extra backbone to be a Jew in the modern world. So again, not the shortest answer, Rabbi Spitz. I happen to be a rabbi. I earned this ability to give a long answer, honestly. So there you go.
Well, again, as a Tustin rabbi, I take such delight in knowing your roots. Local boy makes good. It gives me a great sense of satisfaction. In that regard, just a shout out to Temple Beth Shalom, your synagogue in those years where you had your bar mitzvah, and to Akti, the Orange County Temple Youth, of which you participated. Tell us about your journey to be choosing to become a rabbi.
Well, I think, first of all, if you had asked anybody in my Hebrew school that I would become a rabbi, go on to lead the URJ, people would have probably thought you were, taking some kind of mushrooms, that would be impossible. Rick Jacobs is not going to be a rabbi. Because to be honest, I didn't call me until I was actually in college. And, for me, being Jewish, and Hebrew school, it was something I did. My parents was important to my parents, and my friends were all, part of that whole experience, but it didn't claim my deepest heart. And I worked for many years at Camp Swig, which was the Reform Movement's camp in Northern California. That did inspire, to be very honest. And then I went on my junior year abroad to Israel to study at the Hebrew University. And I walked into Rabbi David Hartman's seminar on Spinoza, Maimonides, and Halevi. And to be honest, I never left. He became such an important mentor to me. And actually, even at his funeral in Jerusalem, I gave one of the eulogies because of his impact. So for me, Rabbi Hartman turned the lights on in terms of really engaging deeply in the Jewish tradition. I went and lived on an Orthodox kibbutz in the north of Israel, thinking, okay, that's going to be a place where I could continue to absorb and dig deeply into Jewish life. And I came back to, I went to undergraduate at UC Santa Barbara, studying religious studies. And I went back and I said, I'm probably going to go on to academics, but I might as well go get a rabbinical degree because it's good to have that training. And I just so loved rabbinics. I loved being in congregations and community, that became the calling of my life. And if you're going to ask me about how I ended up not only a rabbi, but then a rabbi in congregations, and how I ended up in this position, I actually never wanted to leave the congregation. I loved to be a congregational rabbi, still think of it only in warm terms. But along the way, 12 to 13 years ago, the knock on the door invited me to think about Jewish life in a broader way. And that felt really exciting to try and have an impact on not just one fantastic congregation, but on a host of Jewish institutions that, to me, were crying out for decades for a reboot, a reimagination, a rethinking. And I think that's what not only called me to the rabbinate, but kept me fully engaged all these years.
So let's circle back to Rabbi David Hartman and Jerusalem. And that was your junior year abroad
Correct.
when you studied with him. He was an Orthodox, modern Orthodox rabbi, New York Montreal, then a teacher of philosophy at Hebrew University. What's one example of how you hear his voice now informing what you do?
Well, he was definitely a student of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. He was a Orthodox rabbi through and through, and yet he was an iconoclast. He always challenged the status quo of the halakha, of Jewish law, of the state of Israel. He was a person who wanted to see shifts and change. He would tell this story, I'll never forget. He said, my first Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, he said, I was living in Jerusalem. And I looked out at Jerusalem. I said, why is everyone mourning? We have Israel. We have Jerusalem. Let's not go into this deep sackcloth and ashes. And he said, we got to, we should outlaw the fast. We should not make it a day of sadness. Well, the pushback was so profound. He obviously learned that that was not going to be an easy change. But he was somebody who, within the Orthodox world, always had the ability to press on things that he thought were broken. I mean, his daughter created the first egalitarian Orthodox minyan in Jerusalem, Shira Chadashah, which is this beautiful religious community. Not an accident that Rabbi Hartman's daughter, Tova, would have that inspiration. Now, when I went to HUC, I remember telling Rabbi Hartman I was going to go to HUC. He kidded me. He said, Rick, I wanted you to be a rabbi. I didn't tell you had to go be a Reform rabbi, come on. And I said, well, you got me inspired. And for me, this is the place that I choose to be trained because it feels most in line with my thinking and with my own practice. But to be honest, he was kidding about, I missed his memo that it should be an Orthodox. He wanted Jews to be serious, to be thoughtful, to be committed. And honestly, he had a spectrum to make room. I remember I sat with Rabbi Hartman at Rabbi David Ellenson's son's bar mitzvah in Jerusalem at Kol Neshama, and he sat in this egalitarian, synagogue. It was a Monday morning, so tefillin, and he was praying along with all of us. So he had, I think, a kind of spiritual elasticity that would not be typical of an Orthodox rabbi or thinker. But I would say that, he inspired all of us to have a seriousness of Jewish learning and to raise up vibrant Jewish communities. That was his passion. And I think in that regard, he has disciples all over the world. And we're in all different movements, some not even in any of the formal movements. He was a trans-denominational figure to me.
Well, I can add my voice. He was my teacher as well, and in my college years, and made a big impact on me. Circle back and say a little more about why reform for you. And you're now, the president of URJ. Tell us about the place and role for you personally and in a larger way of Reform Judaism.
Yeah, well, first of all, my early memories were at Temple Beth Shalom in Orange County. And my rabbi there, Rabbi Bob Bergman, was a unique individual as well. He was both a member of the Rabbinical Assembly, the Conservative Rabbinical Association, and the CCAR. He had lived in Israel for a number of years. And I would say his practice was more traditional than many of the Reform rabbis of his generation. So already the idea was being Jewish is what mattered, and being serious about the Judaism that you practice mattered. When I was, after studying with Rabbi Hartman and finishing my college, I actually got the application for all three of the major seminaries. I got one from Yeshiva University, one from JTS, and from Hebrew Union College. And I remember I also then went and visited and really wanted to see where I felt I would get not only the best education, but where I would be taught, stretched, and inspired. And without disparaging any of the other seminaries, I felt that for me, HUC was the place where I could be as traditional as I felt called to be, but I also could have the free exercise of my mind to question everything and anything. And so for me, being Reform isn't simply, one of the movements. It's really at the heart of who I am as a proud Reform Jew, Reform rabbi, Reform Zionist. To me, those are all things that really coalesce. And I like the freedom and the openness of Reform, but I also like that intellectual rigor and honesty. And the Reform that I grew up with was definitely a little bit less traditional than I am. We've kept a kosher home. I've been keeping kosher since I was 19. I didn't grow up in a kosher home. And, I think that Reform is a pretty wide gamut of practice and thought, which I'm proud of. And I'm proud to say, again, not to be triumphalist about it, but the Reform movement's the largest movement currently in Jewish life. We're actually larger than all the other movements combined, but the largest movement is the unaffiliated. So I think for all of us, if we're serious about our work, the key is how do we engage those who are under-engaged or not engaged at all? And how do we take everybody wherever they are and make sure that we continue to build a Jewish people that's strong and resilient and not be so lost in our denominations. And denominations can be useful, but they're not an end in any way. They're just means to strengthen Jewish life.
Now, I see from preparing for our conversation that when you began as a rabbi in Brooklyn Heights, where you would serve as the rabbi for 9 years, you began part-time so that you could devote yourself to dance. Talk a little bit about that phase and the spirituality of dance.
Yes, that is not a small part of who I am. I even began my PhD in ritual dance at NYU. To be honest, to me, dance is one of the earliest and most elemental forms of spiritual practice. Before we had words, we had movement. Think of even gestures that we have in Jewish life. Think about music. The way that we move probably were part of the ancient temple ritual. And for me, it was definitely one of the things that I love to dance. Although I grew up in Orange County, so to be honest, my sister went to ballet class. Anybody see the show Chorus Line? There's a very famous song in Chorus Line. I'm watching Cisco Pitter Pat. I'm saying I could do that. Well, my sister hated to dance, but my mom dragged me to drop my sister off at ballet class. And I'm watching my sister hate every minute in the ballet class. And I was trying to say, Amy, I could do that. Let me go in. So I actually I got a scholarship to study at the Reuben Academy in Jerusalem, which is kind of the Israeli Juilliard. So while I was beginning my rabbinical studies, I also began at the Reuben Academy and loved studying there, and was part of a Jewish modern dance company, the Avodah Dance Ensemble. And I love that we kind of re-embody Jewish practice as dance can do. So it's there. It's at the heart of Jewish life. It's in the biblical tradition. It's in the Talmud all over. But the truth is, I think a lot of Western religious life, including Judaism, kind of left the Torah of the body and became very ethereal and very intellectual, which I like all that. but I think all the elements together make for a very powerful spiritual practice.
Well, I delight in the fact that your Judaism is embodied and that you have this dance as part of who you are. You were a pulpit rabbi in Brooklyn Heights, as I noted, and then at Westchester and Scarsdale for 20 years. What's one thing that surprised you about the challenge of being a rabbi that you wouldn't have known when you chose to go to rabbinical school?
I think well, there are many challenges, and Rabbi Spitz, I'm not going to give you a lecture about the challenges of the rabbinate. You could teach that class, I'm sure, being an inspired rabbi for so many years in Tustin and in the conservative movement. I mean, to be truthful, for me, what I couldn't quite imagine was how to lead the revolution of change that, to my mind, was required. When I was going to Hebrew school, I used to joke, my mom didn't stop the car when she was dropping me and my sister off at Hebrew school. She only slowed down. And basically the assumption, which I think was not just for me, but for a generation of people my age, was that you were dropped off so that you could become Jewish, and then your parents picked you up, as if it were something that was good for the kinder, but not good for the adults. And Rabbi Bergman, if I could just make a plug, he was so ahead of his time. When he left Beth Shalom, he founded something called the Israel Academy. And the whole premise of the Israel Academy was you couldn't drop your kids off. You had to come in. So if you wanted your children to get a Jewish education, well, guess what? He said, you come in and you get a Jewish education. If you have one, deepen it. And a lot of people wanted no part of that. They said, no, 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 we like dropping off. We'll go do our errands and, the kids can spend time learning. But the truth is, leading change in community is hard. I don't know if I could just think, when I got to my pulpit in Scarsdale, where my mentor had been the rabbi, Rabbi Jack Stern, basically people would say the following contradictory things. Well, you're the new rabbi, there's too much Hebrew. I hope that you'll make it less Hebrew focused. And then 5 seconds later, someone comes up and goes, you're the new rabbi, I hope that you'll bring more Hebrew. And the truth is, a pluralistic group of people, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, there's a holding together of people who have very different ideas and find different things meaningful. But the thing that I didn't anticipate, which is how unbelievably fulfilling it would be to do that holy work, the sadness, overwhelming, the tragic funerals, the calls in the middle of the night, and all of the, day-to-day pastoral work. But for me, to be honest, leading a Jewish community is one of the greatest privileges. And leading change, when you build up, rapport and respect, people will give you a little latitude to try some of the different things. We reinvented Hebrew school where I was in Westchester, and we used a model similar to the Israel Academy. We created something called Sharing Shabbat. We had about 800 kids in our school. And I said, we're going to experiment with a part of our religious school where you have to come as a family. You can't drop your kid off. You can't come as an adult and leave your kids at home. You come as a family. And to be honest, we called it Shabbat B'Yachad. That part of the temple grew, and it actually fed all of the key leaders. And so demanding more, offering more, didn't get people to turn away. It actually led people to want to lean in further. So it also was reassuring to know that people weren't necessarily looking for less or for minimalist. They wanted something that spoke to their heart. It spoke to the search for a meaningful life. And I just love that, that was part of that experience. And we changed the way we prayed. We experimented with, the way that we did our fundamental work, caring for one another, and even our justice work, to really take it all seriously and to practice it with intentionality, and not occasionally, but on a regular basis.
I know you did a lot of work in those years with Darfur and interfaith in terms of reaching beyond the walls of the synagogue, and that in 2011, when URJ was hiring, they voted unanimously. I did a double take to see you were elected unanimously. What were they looking for in you when you began in 2012 as the head of the Reform movement?
Well, first of all, Jews don't do anything unanimously. And we don't
That's,
decide when to have dinner. We don't decide when dinner is unanimously. So
yeah,
honestly, I was a little surprised, maybe more than a little surprised, and I was very honored. I think, to be honest, I didn't apply for the job. Let me just say that. And I've got on the screen some people who've been leaders of the reform movement. So I'm going to just lay it out plainly. I did not apply. Not because I didn't think it was an important job, but I love doing what I did. Why would I change? Why would I become something other than what my passion brought me to do in congregational life? And I think in the interviews, which there were many and very large committee, I think the hope was, could I create the culture of experimentation, growth, and expansion that had led me in my congregational work? Could we literally, branch out and create movement-wide a mentality that said we are at a moment where we need to test the core models, the models of camp, learning, Hebrew school, day school. Like how do we do the fundamentals? And when I interviewed, that any good interview, they always ask you at the end as the candidate, do you have any questions for us? And I said, are you serious about wanting change? Because if you are the leaders of the board, leading change will bring challenge to everyone. It will bring opportunity. But I have to know, I wouldn't come and even think about this job if I didn't know that people wanted to be on that journey of experimentation, change, growth, and ultimately strengthening. And they said, we don't want someone who is going to be timid about being a change leader. So to be honest, I think there was a real kind of synergy that was developed there. And it was been important because during my years at URJ, these have been very challenging years in the life of the Jewish people, not just with COVID, of course, and the most recent horrific war against Hamas in Gaza. But it's been a time where there have been, I think, regular and deep challenges to the whole model of what it means to be a person of faith, liberal faith in the 21st century. So I think it ultimately worked, but it was a very different rabbinate. It's the rabbinate to be the president of URJ. It's not an administrator, but it's a different kind of community. I'm in synagogues every day, and pretty much every Shabbat I'm somewhere, but it's not the same group of people that I know and love, and who's, when I'm doing the bar mitzvah in my congregation, I knew the grandfather. I named the nephew of the interconnectedness is something profound. But I do think that's what people are hungering for in Jewish life. They're looking for that thing that we know to be community. And if you're in a congregation and you're fulfilled by it, people want some version of that without necessarily having to be locked into, I would say, a yesteryear version of that. Judaism has never kind of come to a point and said, this is it. Synagogues didn't look the way they look today. They didn't look the way they do today when I was growing up. And I hope they don't look exactly the way they do today tomorrow when my grandson is finding his way into Jewish life.
can you say a little more about what is the responsibility to be the president of URJ, and how is it different than being a pope for the Reform movement?
Well, thank God we don't have a pope, and that we have the joke in Israel was, you can have a country with one prime minister, but what about having a country with only prime ministers, right? Where everybody has a strong feeling about what ought to be. I love that I have lots of rabbinic and cantorial colleagues. I have enormously wise lay leaders. So this is not a thing that I decide unilaterally, sitting in prayer in the morning, and I decide what we're going to do today. It means representing the Reform movement and sometimes the Jewish people. I'll give you an example. I remember it was a couple years ago, I was invited to speak at the Presbyterian Convention, and I went. And while I was there, they created a anti-Israel resolution, and I was given a very brief amount of time to argue against it. But as I was thinking about how could I do a very concerted, clear argument against their BDS resolution, it occurred to me that I wanted to say, instead of divesting, why don't you invest in the relationship? Why don't you invest in the Israel that you love and the Israel that I love? And I had this idea that I was leaving that night for Israel, and I wanted to invite the head of the church to come with me, and that we would both meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu. He was still the prime minister then, and he's still the prime minister now. So I called Ron Dermer, who now is the Minister of Strategic Affairs. He had been also, as you know, the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Then he was just a very close advisor. And I said, Ron, do you think the prime minister would meet with me and the head of the Presbyterian Church if we're able to defeat this BDS resolution? He said, well, I could ask him, but it's very late in Israel. I said, yeah, but he doesn't sleep. Why don't you ask him? Please let me know, because I want to be able to get up in front of the whole convention and make this offer. He calls me back 4 minutes later, says, I just spoke to the prime minister. He said, if you get the church to vote down this BDS resolution, he would be delighted to meet with you and the head of the church when you arrive in the next 2 days. So I made the case. There were thousands of people there. We lost by 5 votes. And then we went right on to CNN, and people asked me to reflect on that. I said, I wasn't there, reflecting on the Reform movement. I was there on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of the state of Israel, making the case why we together would be not just hurt, but weakened by such a resolution. And Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked me when I got to Israel. Natan Sharansky, who I work closely with at the Jewish Agency, also. So what it means to be the head of the Reform movement, and I'm sure my colleague Rabbi Jacob Blumenthal leads the United Synagogue and this joined entity with the Rabbinical Assembly, we work very closely together. I was just in Israel a couple of weeks ago, and we were meeting with President Herzog. And I happened to sit down next to Rabbi Moshe Hauer, who leads the Orthodox Union. And President Herzog got so excited, he called on me, he said, Rick, I see you sitting next to the head of the Orthodox movement. I said, Mr. President, I think you know this, but in America, we actually all have the same footing. Nobody's got a higher privileged status. We're all rabbis, we all lead movements. We actually like each other. We work together on behalf of the Jewish people. I said, one day soon, please God, let that be the case in Israel, where the heads of the Orthodox movements, Reform, conservative, some of the secular, could actually all stand on the same ground with the same ability to lead, the same funding, so that the Jewish people would be strengthened by that diversity. So again, I'm just giving you a flavor. What it means to lead the Reform movement means that you get every headache that gets bumped up the ladder will end up on your desk for sure. But also it means very often representing the Jewish people in various settings that are, I think, very important. And it's a great honor to be able to do so.
And you've done so quite ably. I don't want to focus because of our limited time. We only have about 10 more minutes, and I'm going to open it up for other people. But I will bring everybody's attention to the work you did just in the last week or two with the evangelical Lutheran community, where, well, on one foot. Talk about that, because then I'm going to have something more negative.
Yeah, well, I love negativity. That's the calling card of Jewish leaders, right? It's negativity. But I just tell you, the evangelical Lutheran Church, remember, Martin Luther is the founder of that church. He was his teachings were anti-Semitic, yes, anti-Jewish, yes. And the head of the church until I think she's completing her tenure in next week or two, Elizabeth Eaton, has been a great friend and colleague of the Jewish people and of mine. So I went to the convention a few weeks ago in Phoenix, Arizona, and I wanted to be there to help pay tribute to her, because she worked to bring the Jewish community and the evangelical Lutheran Church closer together. And once again, because of the war in Gaza, there were some harsh words being spoken in the plenary session by people who were there as delegates. And the presiding bishop, Elizabeth Eaton, came down off the plenary platform afterwards. He said, "You look pained during that discussion." I said, "It was painful to listen to some of those harsh words spoken about Israel." She said, "What can I do to be helpful?" I said, "Well, you have given me a chance to speak tomorrow, but I can't really respond to what I heard with just a few minutes. Can you give me more time?" She said, "Take as much time as you need." And honestly, I wasn't sure if I would be booed. I wasn't sure if people wanted to hear what I had to say, but I feel close to the church. I've worked closely with local Lutheran institutions. And at the end of that talk, I got a standing ovation. To be honest, I was just glad that they let me finish my talk. They listened. I don't know that everybody, I know everybody did not agree with what I said. It was a very strong case for Israel, for the safety of the Jewish people, fighting against anti-Semitism, which is obviously in a very acute moment. But I think sometimes building those bridges across lines of faith and difference make all the difference in the world. Some people will say after October 7th, all of our friends left us. I would not, that's not my experience. I have many Black leaders and many Christian leaders, even a few Muslim leaders who did not abandon the Jewish community after October 7th. Some did, but I think building that solidarity is part of our job. It's not just to build solidarity within the Jewish people, but across all those lines of difference. And to be honest, growing up in Orange County, if you didn't build those connections across lines of difference, you weren't going to build much, connection. That's what we had in Orange County then. So I think our job is also to be advocates for the Jewish people and for the well-being of all of God's children here in North America and in places around the world.
And I understand that in addition to the standing ovation, they overturned what they had voted on the day before.
I wish that were the case, Rabbi Spitz. That is not the case.
Oh,
What I
okay,
did hear, because once it was voted on, it was already enacted.
I see.
But what I did hear very much from people who were there, including the leadership, was that they were affected by not just my speech, but by the arguments that we actually could build something more by being, first of all, aware of the lack of safety that Jews are experiencing throughout the world, and particularly in communities where these churches live. So I think the impact will be felt today and going forward. And I hope that it echoes in people's ears when they want to only hold a harsh view and will ask a question and say, well, maybe that's not actually the story. Maybe that's just a version of the story. But it's hard right now to be a rabbi, to be a lay leader, to be a proud Jew, but it is also what this moment requires. We are still obviously, we're approaching 700 days of the hostages. I just came back, met with former hostages, hostage families. It's excruciating. And to also know what our required focus on safety. I went with a church leader to a program in a synagogue. We walked through the doors of the synagogue, and it was like going through TSA at the airport. Like all of you have to have security if you're going to have a synagogue or a federation or a day school. And the church leader said to me, "We don't like to do that. We'd like to be welcoming." I said, "Well, when they stop murdering our people in synagogue, we'll get rid of all the security. But right now, it's too dangerous to be Jewish in community without security." So again, this is the moment we're in. We don't choose our moments, and this is a moment where I believe leadership is even more essential.
So two topics to address that relate to Israel, and then I'll turn it over to Sherelle, who will field some questions from the people listening. One of the things you've been very involved with, and you mentioned earlier, one of my heroes, Natan Sharansky, was building an egalitarian wall, an egalitarian space at the Kotel, that he was very actively involved with the non-Orthodox community that did not go anywhere. Or you'll say a word about it, but he being a man named Yariv Levin, said regarding Reform Jews amidst that, which is again just before October 7th for the years before, he said regarding Reform Jews, we a wall would be unnecessary, quote, because they will all be gone in 3 generations. He, at the moment, that same person is the deputy prime minister, a member of Likud, instrumental in promoting the Israeli judicial reform. He's the justice minister and minister of the interior. That takes my breath away. I'm sure it does to you as well. Say a word about non-orthodoxy, rabbinics, and Israel, and what is your hope? Where do you see it going once this war is over?
Well, first of all, the story of Reform and conservative Judaism in Israel is a great story. It's growing, and it's growing when the torrent of both public and official support is not only withheld, but is literally limiting the growth. There are about 11% of Israelis who identify with the Reform and the conservative movement. That's the same size as the ultra-Orthodox community right now in Israel. So we actually are growing. The proliferation of congregations is all over. We have, over 150 rabbis ordained in Israel. There's a great story to tell there. And I would just say, to Yariv Levin, it's a sad case, and a bitter man who, by the way, has led the judicial coup. That is actually his most deep commitment, is to weaken the Israeli democracy. But the truth is, what we did with Natan Sharansky, we did with Prime Minister Netanyahu. It went somewhere. It was approved by the government of Israel, 15-5, that there would be an egalitarian section to the Western Wall. And the point that Sharansky made was one wall for one people. This is one state for all of us. It's a Jewish state for all of us, not for some of us. So I think that's the vision of Jewish life, that we're all in this together. And he may not, Yariv Levin is a secular Jew. He may not like us, but the truth is we're alive and well. The conservative movement, we're alive and well. And we're together fighting for the kind of Jewish life that we all not only want, but deserve. So, I don't think you ever should be dissuaded by the naysayers of any community. There are always going to be such people. I think the story in Israel is an inspired story. And I do think that, some of my closest friends who died on October 7th died because they lived right along the Gaza border. Those were communities that we had a very vibrant, still do a very vibrant set of reform institutions along there, the kibbutzim. So let's continue to build the Israel that we are all a part of. We all have equal rights, pluralistically. Currently, I can't do a wedding. Friends ask me to do a wedding of their child in Israel. I can't, not because I am American, but because I'm Reform. That's not the Jewish state that we ultimately are building. We're building a place where everyone can live the Jewish life that they choose, and to not privilege orthodoxy above all else. That is the reality here. It's served us very well. I think it would serve us very well were that to be accentuated. But as long as this war is going on, obviously every bit of our energy is to get the hostages home and to give safety and security to the people who are much in need of that. So let's focus on what we've built. We've built something quite extraordinary. And I'm looking forward to some of the super hard questions that Sherelle is going to make sure put a little extra oomph in them so that you can make sure that I earn my keep today.
So the last question to make that bridge to Sherelle's hard questions, going to the URJ this morning, the website of which you are president, there was kind of a banner statement in which it says, we implore that to end and not extend this war. Talk about that political statement.
It's the stance of, I would say, majority of Israelis who've been in the streets and it's the stance of almost all of the hostage families. And it is the stance of our Israeli reform movement. So to be honest, we're not imposing something, we're reflecting on the moment that we're in. I do think that Israel is obviously still at war. I think the fear that, by the way, the chief of staff yesterday and the day before with all of the leaders of the IDF and the other security apparatus of the Israeli state, all came out and said that extending the war into this next phase will be disastrous. So again, if you just read that by itself, Rabbi Spitz, it probably feels like it's a kind of a self-contained thing. If you set it in the context of this moment, I believe it's a very powerful and appropriate reflection of where we are and a statement of solidarity with the Jewish people and the people of Israel, and frankly, the future that we must create. And the losses have been horrific, and it's time to move to that time after. Again, the ceasefire that's on the table is a temporary one. It doesn't bring back all the hostages, but it saves at least 10 of the hostages. And I think at this moment, to extend without any possibility of bringing any additional hostages home, the hostages I met with who had just returned, they knew that the people still there were hanging on by a thread and literally implored us, begged us, be responsible, speak up, make sure that sanity is what we follow.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking up. And I turn it over now to Sherelle to do some harvesting.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I could take credit for the questions, but they're not mine. We have our CSP community is good with questions. So I'll start with a couple that I'll put together. What would you say are the major, maybe top 2 or 3 trends in liberal Judaism today? And what would be the top 2 or 3 challenges? I'm putting Israel aside for a moment. Other than that, what would you say are the challenges for liberal Judaism and the Reform movement?
Well, I think there are challenges for all Jews. And that, of course, anti-Semitism isn't a, Orthodox problem or reform. It's across the board. So I think how do we continue to be a vibrant, welcoming religious community and also make sure to be protective of the very well-being of our people is one of the great challenges. The irony of ironies, we've had more conversions during the last 2 years than probably in the previous decade. People are hungry to be a part of this Jewish people, even as we're embattled in the face of anti-Semitism and in the aftermath of this October 7th. So I think for us, it's a battle for relevance and not for bureaucracies. Sometimes religious life, I look at some of the other major religions, they have all their different layers. They've got the local and the different, oversight and decision-making bodies. People are looking for the living, breathing experience of Jewish life. When I was growing up in Orange County, I didn't feel that when I went to Temple. Temple was not the place that ignited my soul. When I went to camp Shabbat outside in the Redwoods in Northern California, that was a taste of something just inspiring. The prayer was alive. The celebratory joy was alive. I experienced that intensely living in Israel for 2 years. So I think what we're looking at in the liberal movements is to bring more people into the actual experience of what living a religious life is, a spiritual life, and not getting only caught up in the, who's a member, who's not a member, all the different, I would say, required things about keeping big institutions moving. I think our challenge and our opportunity is to have Jewish life be the thing that we lead with. And I'm looking at Peter Shapiro right in my front. My square is looking right at my friend Peter, and a longtime leader at the URJ. I think that my predecessors, Rabbi Alexander Schindler, blessed memory, was brilliant about embracing the widest part of the community. The whole community in 1978 thought interfaith families ought to be just pushed away. Rabbi Schindler said that's outrageous. Pull those families closer, bring them in, love them, grow them. And it's turned out to be transformational. Interfaith families are not lost to the Jewish people. They, in so many cases, become the people who carry the deep commitment. So again, that's up to us. So I think those building vibrant face-to-face Jewish communities that are serious, doing the work of justice and living our values in community, that is core. And I think that, you know, not being an island unto ourselves, but also not being, you know, so busy changing the world that we forget about our own people. It's a balance. It always has been a balance. And I think it's desperately in need of that balance today.
That's a great segue for another question I got, where other than the interfaith connections that you mentioned, do you have any conversations with rabbis from the Orthodox community, from the Chabad community? What do those look like? And what do you think about how the split of denominations affects the unity of the Jewish people?
Thank you. Well, the first thing I would say is, remember my whole discussion with Rabbi Hartman. He's the one who inspired me, and I have many relationships. Rabbi Moshe Hauer, with whom I was at that meeting at the president's house. But I also reached out to the head of Chabad when I was chosen for this job, and I asked if we could meet. And I walked into his office, 770 Eastern Parkway, Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky, wonderful man, and he just looked at me across his desk. He put down his glasses like this, and he said, "Rabbi Jacobs, you don't care about Shabbat, you don't care about prayer, and you don't care about halakha. So what are you so busy doing?" So I thought to myself, well, this is going to be a short meeting. It starts off with that kind of combative tone. So I said, "Rabbi Krinsky, we do care about Shabbat. We do care about tefillah, and we do care about Jewish practice. We just care differently than you. But please, no, I actually came to learn from you. So could we actually have a conversation?" We talked for about 2.5 hours. I've gone back several times. He invited me to the Kinus HaShluchim, which is the big gathering with all the shluchim from all over the world. And I got there. It's in Brooklyn, in this huge hangar. It's right down by the waterfront. So I figured, when you go to a wedding, they have the cards where your table. I figured he's going to put me in the back. So I take my card. I'm looking for my table. I look over and there's Rabbi Krinsky sitting at this table. I said, well, I'm sure I'm not going to sit at his table. And I get closer. I'm looking at my number and, oh my God, I actually am at his table. And then he's got it actually not just at the table, but where I sit. Well, I'm not going to sit next to Rabbi Krinsky. He's going to have one of the important Chabad rabbis. And I look, and he's got me sitting right next to him. And then for the next 2.5 hours, every time one of the Chabad emissaries came over to pay their respects to Rabbi Krinsky, he introduced me in the following way. He said, "Do you know my friend, Rabbi Rick Jacobs?" He did not have to introduce me to anyone. He did not have to call me his friend. He did not have to call me by the title rabbi. He did all three. And I took from that a very powerful lesson about what it means to be part of the Jewish people. We don't have to agree on everything. We can actually disagree on many things, but we can actually be part of the same people that have that sense that we love one another, stand up for one another, even in our differences. So the answer to, am I a part of Orthodox gatherings all the time? Feel very comfortable in those settings and feel it's very important to, when there's an attack in Borough Park here in New York City, and one of the, traditional members of the New York City Jewish community is attacked, I always try to be one of the first people to speak up, because I want the whole community to know that, I don't dress as a Hasidic Jew, but we're part of the same people. And honestly, if they're going to come for one of us, they're going to come for all of us. So I just think, that solidarity with the Jewish community is profound. It's important. The problem is when I'm in Israel, it's impossible to do that because most Orthodox leaders will have nothing to do with me. When I'm in the Knesset regularly meeting with leaders, the ultra-Orthodox leaders will not even talk to me. They won't extend their hand. What can I say? It's to me, it's a shame. It's an abdication of leadership, but it is the reality. But I think here we do very well with Klal Yisrael, and I think that's.
With your permission, before I move to the next question, I'm gonna make this one a little more difficult. Does this relationship, do you find it go both ways? So you described yourself being invited and going to these gatherings. Do you find that the Orthodox Chabad, ultra-Orthodox religious leaders, when invited into Reform and conservative spaces, does that happen too?
Not always. I'll just say it right out. But I do know that I've officiated many funerals, even had a couple of weddings with Chabad colleagues, and it's easier because I'm a male rabbi. I think you probably can get that from the Zoom screen here. For my female colleagues, it's much harder, and they don't tell those same kinds of good stories about how we can actually work together. But I do think that understanding that traditional Jews have different requirements. When my daughter became bat mitzvah, the head of the Young Israel of Scarsdale came. The rabbi came, and it was Shabbat morning. And I don't think he'd ever been to an egalitarian synagogue before during prayer. And Rabbi Angela Bookdahl, who's now the rabbi at Central Synagogue, she was my associate, and she was leading the service with one of my colleagues. And the only seat in the whole sanctuary that morning, because the rabbi's daughter was having her bat mitzvah, was in the second row. And so he came in, he's looking for a nice seat, maybe a little bit in the back. He comes, he sits down in the front row. And one of my members watched him and said afterwards, Rabbi didn't open the book. I said, do you understand what that rabbi did? He told his Orthodox synagogue that he was going to leave services early, Shabbat morning, so he could come to our Westchester Reform Temple. And when they asked him, why are you going? He said, because my friend's daughter is having her bat mitzvah. And that's what you do. He wasn't signing on to, women and men sitting together in prayer. Like, I think it's got to be a two-way street. And if we're going to be in a pluralistic world, we're going to have to not only learn what it means to be in community, we're also going to have to figure out where we can bend. And he bent considerably to walk into that sanctuary, for which I am eternally grateful to him. And I showed up when, my older colleague there's son they were having the Ufruf, and somebody in my Reform synagogue said, are you going there? They have a mechitza. They separate men and women. Can you go there? I said, my friend's son they're having an Ufruf. How could I not go? Of course I'm going. So again, how do we live that? Because if we're not living it, then it's not going to actually take root. And I think that the Jewish people really, in this moment, with all the people who hate us, wish us harm, can we not find more commonality? It feels essential and life affirming.
Thank you. I'm going to ask two more questions before I pass it on to Rabbi Spitz, just because I got so many from people. One is, how would you recommend for rabbis to engage about the Israel-Gaza situation this Rosh Hashanah in synagogues?
It is the question. So everybody knows it's the question. The one thing I would say, and I've said it to our rabbis, I think avoiding Israel is the worst of the options. We have to figure out how to talk about it authentically, lovingly, wisely. And I think we have to make space that in our congregations, we actually don't all think the same way about US politics, Israeli politics. But honestly, my connection to Israel isn't about who's prime minister or which coalition is in power. My connection is to the people, to the values, and to the aspirations of what Israel represents. And if we can't affirm something really fundamental, I think we abandon Israel to the political pundits. And that's not a place I want Israel to live. I want Israel to live in the place of deep relationship. But I also think, and again, this may not sit well with everyone, I think we're morally required to raise a voice sometimes of critique. And Prime Minister Netanyahu is somebody I've worked closely with. He spoke, this is before the war began on October 7th when we were having the judicial coup. I spoke at a protest outside of his hotel here in New York City, because we were very concerned, we still are, about the weakening of democracy. And the next morning, we were supposed to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu after his speech at the UN. So I said to my wife, I said, I'm supposed to be at this meeting, but I think after I speak at this protest, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of free time in the morning, so we could go together and do our Shabbat, grocery shopping. Well, the morning came after I spoke at this protest, right across the street from the Regency Hotel on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And Prime Minister's staff was there watching. I wasn't canceled from that meeting. And every time he's come to New York, I've met with him. So I actually don't think being critical is the danger. Being critical without love and without a deep connection and commitment to the thriving of Israel. But I think if we are just, saying amen to anything that Israel is doing or anything that a political leader says or does, I think we lose some of our moral credibility. So I think I want my colleagues to speak from their heart, want them to affirm a relationship that cannot break. And if they find a voice of criticism, they do so from love, and that they know they're speaking to people who are across the spectrum when it comes to Israel. And the end job of a rabbi is hold their communities together. And this is a moment where that's even more important.
Thank you. One last question, because I love this one, before I pass it on. If you were asked to speak for CSP, what topic would you choose to speak about?
It depends on the moment that you ask me to do it. I think that there's no shortage. Obviously, this is a group of people who are very thoughtful about Jewish life. I think that we could talk about some of the ways we imagine the Jewish future. I hear people all the time, usually people my age and older, like going, why can't kids today be like we were? Why can't Judaism be the wonderful Judaism that I grew up with? And I always say, like, first of all, it wasn't always as wonderful as you remember it. And that was the right thing for that moment. So I think I'd love to come and do a session, if you were going to give me an open call, to talk about how do we reimagine not just the tomorrow and the next year, but for the kids and the grandkids and the great-grandkids who are being born today. What could Jewish life be for them in different ways, but no less vital, no less important, but not to be caught up on the trappings, but on the ikar, the essence. So I would love to get, that's to me the heart of my every day, is to be thinking about what we're building, not what we're preserving, but what we're building for tomorrow. And I think that is, to me, the essential Jewish question of today.
Thank you. Rabbi Spitz, I'm passing it over to you for our final questions and words.
Thank you, Sherelle. So a thank you again, Rabbi Jacobs, for this privilege of spending this hour with you. I know this summer was of milestones for you. It marks in June the 13th year, your bar mitzvah as president of URJ. And with Susan, July began your 50th year together. So in this moment of Elul, Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li, I celebrate the longevity of your commitments. And the closing question, in this Elul, a time, frankly, of enormous darkness for the Jewish people, for Israel, uncertainties, what's your shofar blow? What is the sound of hope that you would wish to leave us with?
First of all, just to say that my wife does math better than I do. We're actually 39 years married.
Oh, 39.
No. We just got to take them one at a time. I'm hoping
40th year. Oh, so then I'll flip it. That 39 would mean your 40th year, which means entering the promised land.
There we go. Perfect. Rabbis always can make a drush, and that's a beautiful drush. Listen, with this Elul, I sound the shofar every morning. My neighbors in our apartment building don't always appreciate when I sound the shofar early on in the morning. But to me, it's a call to awaken. It's to awaken to our best selves, to the hope and beauty of the Jewish community, for peace, for hope. To me, I can't wake up and only feel the pain and the darkness. And I think our Jewish tradition requires that. I'll just say that this actually is the week of my bar mitzvah. I was bar mitzvah Parshat Ki Teitzei many years ago. And it starts Ki Teitzei L'Milchama, when you go out to war. So then the war that was raging was Vietnam. We had just had the 6-Day War. Wasn't quite the 73 war. But I also think that when you go out, bring every value that you have. And I think for us, to me, the shofar sound is to awaken us to the beauty of Jewish life, to the depth of Jewish life, to the power of Jewish life. And with all the challenges, and we have many, we have this incredible gift to live lives of holiness and of beauty and of commitment to others and the well-being of our people. So let's double down on what it means to be a Jew in this 21st century. Let's double down on what it means to stand for the other, what it means to carry the blessing and the burden of Jewish people wherever they live with us in our daily lives. And I hope that we begin 5786 filled with the sense that this year we can finally have peace in the Middle East. And if it be temporary, let it be temporary, and that we can begin the long-term process of building a better future for all those who live in Israel and I hope that everyone who's on the Zoom screen, I hope that you and your families down there are well, but can enjoy those blessings of Jewish life and freedom. So thank you for this gift of being with all of you. I hope some of it was interesting. It was certainly fun for me to go back to Tustin in my memory and to see also, I'll just leave you, Orange County is one of the most vibrant Jewish communities now. It wasn't when I grew up. And I think Rabbi Spitz, there are a lot of people who can take credit for that. I believe you take an enormous amount of credit for that, the kind of communities that you've built, the kind of Jewish life that you've planted. So I hope everybody who's local in Orange County can feel that we're at a pretty strong phase in Orange County. And please God, let that phase continue and strengthen. And I hope to come back to Orange County and to see the flowering of that. Howard, of course, is in front of the Brooklyn Bridge. So Howard, thank you for reminding us that Orange County is not the entirety of the Jewish world, but it's certainly a very important part of my Jewish world and for many of you. So thank you, and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Thank you. Thank you.